We all have different communication styles that we tend to gravitate towards. And even though we may be speaking the same verbal language, sometimes our needs, wants, and desires get lost in translation when it comes to our closest relationships. Welcome to Health, Harmony, and Happiness with Kathy. I'm your host, Kathy Stricker. I'm a wife to a law enforcement officer and mama to 3 lively littles. I'm a business owner, yoga teacher, health coach, and wellness and life enthusiast. And what I really like doing is connecting others like you with resources that could bring you health, harmony, and happiness on your life journey. These 3 elements are a result of that inner light that flows naturally through you and brings contentment. They happen when you seek to live mindfully as your best self and tune in to following this inner guidance. May this podcast serve as a nudge to discover tools that could help you on your path towards more conscious living. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 36 of Health, Harmony, and Happiness with Kathy. I hope this day finds you well and that whenever you're listening to this, the sun is shining, and if it's not, you've found some sunshine in another way in your life. I'm so glad that you are here and that you are listening and that you are supporting the show. It really does mean the world to me, and I'm glad to be able to share this message of health, harmony, and happiness with you and just to help you find those little nuggets that maybe will cultivate more of those elements in your life. Did you know that you are exactly where you need to be right now? Whatever it is you may be facing, good or bad, challenges, joys, you're meant to be doing that right now. And it is amazing how everything is so tied together, and we are always in the place that we are supposed to be at this moment, which sounds kind of broad and vague, I realize. But sometimes it's just good to have that reminder. I'll tell you what, I know that I need to have that reminder for myself every once in a while as well. So keep going and doing what you're doing, because no matter what that is, you're making a difference in someone's life just by listening to this, because you're open to receiving new information. You're open to expanding who you are as a person. And that expansion is beautiful. And one of the elements that is crucial with expansion or change in our lives, much like what a lot of us are going through right now, is communication. Sometimes we don't know how to communicate the most effectively with the people closest to us. So that's what we are talking about in today's episode. We're talking with Katie Rössler, who is a licensed counselor actually in Germany, but from the U.S. She's a wife and a mama and creator of the Chief Household Officer Academy, which she'll tell us a little bit more about today as well. But before we get into that conversation, would you just take a moment to click subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening? It helps us get this message out to the rest of the world. Hi, Katie. How are you today?
I'm good, Kathy. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for joining us from Germany. We're talking about communication today, and I was sharing with you a little bit before we started recording about my husband's and my miscommunication today. And I think it's such a common thing for couples, whether you're married or not married, especially when you add kids to the mix and being quarantined. My husband is still working because he's an essential worker, and his schedule sometimes changes. That is a common thing, I think, for a lot of people, quarantine aside. So communication becomes really challenging. And one of the things that I hear from my peers most often about why their husband's not doing this or why he's not helping out more with this. But I think the missing link there is usually communication. But it's also one of the things that gets dropped the most. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it's the thing we drop the fastest because we get into the mindset they should read our minds. Don't they know that I'm going to need help? Don't they know that, no, this is what's going on? So completely, it's the first thing to go.
Okay, so before we get too far into the interview, tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and why it is you are this expert in communication.
Yeah, so I am a licensed counselor from the USA, but I live in Munich, Germany with my two girls and my husband. My husband is German, which is why we're here. And yeah, so I've practiced for 12 years and I found myself really gravitating towards couples and wanting to be able to help them. I call it translate. Sometimes the disagreements they were having, or the times where I noticed that there was like a disconnect was largely because they were speaking two different languages. Typically, one was more of the feeler and one was more of the thinker. And so many times in my couples therapy sessions, I am translating. I am helping them to better hear versus defensively react to what is going on. And so just overall, like communication is important in my own marriage. We're a similar situation as you guys. My husband is essential. He's gone. I'm here all day. And it is very easy for things to fall through the cracks because we're just in like project mode, get it done mode, whatever it might be. But even prior to this time, it is very easy for us to get in our own heads and to think the other person's on board and realize that conversation we had in our head never really happened out loud. And then we get really frustrated that they weren't a part of that internal conversation. And it can lead to arguing, which is why I created the course Healthy Arguing, because I really wanted to help people see, like, we all have an arguing style. We all have something that it's habitual almost, whether we grew up with it or it's the opposite response of what our parents did or our caregivers. And I wanted people to realize, like, you don't naturally come out of the womb, like, knowing how to argue healthy. You typically come out being reactive. And so many of us didn't learn those skills. And many couples that I was working with, I just thought, like, these are resources people need to hear more about, that they're actually quite easy skills to learn. It's just breaking the old habits. Yeah. And so our communication suffers because we're not willing to be mindful. We get kind of mindless and just go through the routine. We don't realize we actually have to actively be aware of our communication.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. How do you get both parties on board, I guess, for that, first of all? Like, how do you bring that up? Because I think sometimes that communication breakdown even comes so early as, like, even letting the other person know that we're not communicating and that's what's happening here.
Yeah. So when I first, before I created the course, it was a workshop, a live workshop. And so I would have usually women, there were men who came occasionally, but usually women come, and to hear them kind of share, like, we're both tired of arguing, and we talk about being tired of arguing. We just don't know how to fix it. Or the opposite, we never argue. And then when we do, it's like huge. And so when I started hearing more of these stories, I realized that it's actually not difficult to tell for you and your partner to agree you guys are arguing too much. Or when you do, it's like, where did this come from? It's the next step of, it's okay. We have permission to not know how to do this on our own. And that's why I think, like, online courses can be really wonderful if you're not comfortable with therapy. You're like, okay, well, first of all, I know in my own personal life with a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, trying to create a schedule that works for me, my work, my partner, childcare, all of these things. And then let me make sure it works for the therapist can be really exhausting. And so knowing that there are books out there are courses online that you can be doing together a couple nights out of the week to learn these skills, and then to, like, talk about them. And then from there go, you know what, we probably do need some therapy to help. Let's see what we can do. And there's so many of us, even before this time of being indoors, we're already doing online therapy or online coaching for couples. So, the availability of people is actually much better than it used to be when we were all traditionally in our offices, like a couple of years ago.
Sure.
So it's not the realization of, hey, we're arguing too much, or this is a problem. It's okay to need help.
Absolutely. So accepting and realizing that there is something going on, and if you want it to get better, well, we have to do something about it. And this could be the next step then.
I was going to say, in taking ownership, not I'm pointing the finger at you. We're arguing all the time and you're the problem, saying, I realize I am 50% of this. And whenever I say that, like, hey, both of you, it's a 50-50 when it comes to arguing, usually there's a rolling of the eyes. It's like, no, it's more him or more her. But both of you have to like humbly come to the point where you go, neither of us are helping. Like
Absolutely.
something's not right. Neither of us are making it better, even if we think we're making it better. Can't tell you how many times I've sat down with a couple and one of them's like, well, what did I say that set her off? Like, I just plainly said it this way. And I have to go, that's a trigger. Can we talk about why that's a trigger? It has nothing to do with you, but it is a trigger for your wife to hear it said this way.
Yeah.
And I can see why you were trying to just explain your reasoning and your point of view. But until you hear and understand your wife, you're going to keep talking the same way, and it's just going to lead to more arguing.
Yeah. So what are some of the takeaways or the components of this healthy arguing class that you offer that teach couples to argue more effectively?
Yeah. So the first section of it, I really talk about what happens to our bodies and our brains, like what chemicals are going off, what's occurring. I mean, we all sense it, whether we realize it or not, but a small argument can lead to the fight or flight response, which is heart racing, tunnel vision, inability to really hear what's going on around us, short-term memory loss. So I'm sorry, when you argue about what was just said 5 minutes ago, you probably don't have it right, and neither does your partner. So these types of things that we think, no, it doesn't really impact me that much. But when you learn it and you learn the science behind it, you go, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. It makes sense why arguing in a car is actually really dangerous. Now I understand.
Yeah, it's very much like the response that your body undergoes when there's stress placed on it for anxiety or worry. Exactly. Or anything intense like that going on. That fight or flight, and what do you have the tendency to do? Do you freeze? Do you want to just naturally fight back? But that's what our bodies were designed to do. That's what we were made to do. And that's how we were created. Once you start to recognize that that's going on, what's the best way to deal with it?
So we go from there, we transition into what your arguing style is. So then you know more of what are your specific physical responses and emotional responses, and then what are the actions you're doing without maybe realizing it. And from there, I talk about how to improve those styles, how to recognize your limits and create those boundaries. A lot of people think, well, if we stop the discussion right now and step away for even 20 minutes, we'll never come back and discuss it, or it won't make it better. And so I talk about how to create those boundaries and that space that's needed to calm down physically, so you can think clearly. So your short-term memory comes back. So you're not already like in this upheaval and struggling to just breathe deep breaths. Sure. Your brain needs the oxygen. So I teach you how to have that in a responsible and positive way where it doesn't kick up somebody else's maybe trauma response of being left or abandoned, which is often what happens when somebody walks out the room and it triggers something in us. We have our own history of either feeling abandoned or being afraid of being abandoned. And then sometimes for the other person, it might be this, there's something wrong with me. There's something inherently wrong with me. And so you're leaving or you're reacting this way because of it. So the whole course really teaches you more about yourself. And then from there, the steps you can take to start to improve your communication so that when you argue, it is less about triggers and reactiveness and more about what is it specifically we're arguing about and what outcome do we want to have. And my biggest thing is, are you trying to be effective or are you trying to be right? And often when I watch couples argue, it's about being right. That's why we argue the specifics. Well, no, it was on Tuesday, not Wednesday, or
Sure.
In the grand scheme of the argument, does it matter what day it was? Well, no, it's a smoke screen. We're trying to smoke screen what really is, hey, I'm really hurt because of this. I don't want to tell you I'm hurt because I don't want you to ever know you hurt me. So I'm going to fight with you about the details of something. So that's the course just guides you on how to see yourself more clearly, I think, when it comes to when you argue.
Man, sounds like it would be so beneficial even when dealing with little people, right?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Like, I'm thinking of the
Friends,
arguments I
family
have.
members.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the arguments I have with my 6-year-old, and man, he's strong-willed, and oh boy, he just is who he is. I mean, he's my child, he's my husband's child, and we're both pretty
Yep.
strong-willed people. But yeah, that sounds amazing. Sounds like a great course. So to me, a healthy relationship is when there is communication going on and it's flowing and it feels like you're in the flow. Kind of like with life. When you feel like you're flowing along with life, you're not swimming upstream,
Mm-hmm.
things are going well and just clicking, right? So that involves communication. That involves also realizing that sometimes that's not going to be there just because life is cyclical and things come and go and we go through quarantine times apparently. But the hope is that those times of stress and of disagreement or argument or the feel like you're going against the grain of things become shorter, right? So that you're able
Right.
to recognize the patterns, recognize that something may be bothering you sooner rather than letting it swell and burst or create constant little arguments all the time, right?
Right.
Do you have any tips that can help marriages shorten that time or help partnerships shorten that time of maybe the going against the grain where you're getting back into the flow of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest tips is to remember, even when you're in your groove and in the flow, life is happening around you. So just like this situation now where we're all inside and we didn't expect it to occur, it messes up all of our communication. You could probably have had one of the healthiest communication styles. And through this stress, through the anxiety, through the what ifs and whens and all of that, it naturally kicks up our own responses. And then we're a little more testy with our partner. So when you're transitioning back into, okay, let's get back into our flow, it's the same as any habit that you're trying to get back into. Like if I want to start exercising every morning for 15 minutes, like I've got to really be mindful to do that and really make the time. If I want to connect with my partner more so that we're arguing less and we feel that friendship again and that intimacy, then I need to make time for that. I don't need to turn on Netflix immediately at night. I don't need to, escape and get on the phone with a friend. I need to be present. And that takes both of you. And so it's a very humble place. I think when we actually look at what marriage is, we tend to go into it very prideful and like it's me and you. And we try to create this divide in many ways. When we humbly go, hey, I'm imperfect and you're imperfect, and this has been a really difficult time. How do we get back on the bandwagon and the flow? Here's some ideas I have that don't point the finger. And here's some, what are your ideas? And then you start to do those things. The great thing is, again, it's like creating that habit again. If you already had a habit of it, it's going to be much easier to get back in the flow, like riding a bike. You haven't done it in a while.
Sure.
You feel a little awkward, but then all of a sudden you're like, I've got this. So it's as simple as that. You just want to already have the healthy habits to begin with.
What are some of those key healthy habits that you encourage couples to recognize in their own relationships, or if they don't have, then begin to develop them?
So a big one is, especially those with kids, is making sure you're making time daily, if possible, to at least chat for 15 to 20 minutes of just, hey, how are you? What's going on in your life, in your world? Just like you would a friend. And to keep that communication separate from, what did your kids do? What are the plans of the day? This is what I need to get done. Like, don't make it project or business talk. Make it life talk. Like, oh my God, I listened to this funny thing today. I read this quote that made me think of you. Stuff like that, that gives you that feeling, again, of just a lightheartedness about the relationship is important.
Of who you were when you came together and didn't have the kids.
Or who you're becoming.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I know, like, you become a mom and, like, some of your interests change, or the thing, like, you might go, man, I wish being able to go to the concerts on the weekends as easy as I used to, but you know what? I'm enjoying this. And this is a new part that I love. And so getting to know each other, because we are constantly changing. We are not the people that we started our relationship as, and that is okay. But you have to take an effort or make an effort to really get to know that person as they change, and not one day be like, I don't know who you are anymore.
I love that.
Because you didn't make the effort. And neither of you usually made the effort.
Right.
You think it just will always be the same person that you woke up, always wake up to. It's not true.
Right. How do you make that a priority then? Because, oh my goodness, some days you get to the end of the day and it's like, I can't do anything else but sit down and like I just want to zone out. And
right.
Before you know it, a month's gone by and you haven't done this date night or whatever it is that you plan to do with your spouse or with your partner.
Right.
Ah.
So this is something I find interesting, because if we look at it in terms of like, maybe you've got a really close family member you talk to every week, or a friend that you write with every day, why don't we treat our partners that way too?
So true. So true.
But, so there are people in your life that you are regularly interacting with, and all you do is take a couple minutes to do that.
Yeah.
And so finding that, ability, whether you guys write each other during the day, you can write little like cute love messages or things just to connect. And it doesn't have to be this like, now we're sitting on the couch and we're staring at each other and I don't even know what to say because I'm exhausted. But that's what we often feel. And when we're all able to go to normal date nights, please stop going to restaurants and sitting and eating. Like, go do things that are fun. Because if you sit down and stare at each other, you're going to probably argue, because there's always something to argue about when you're, in an awkward situation. But going for walks together, going and doing like the indoor trampoline parks, or trying something new, like being able to just feel you again as a couple doing fun things.
Sure.
That reignites that spark in you of like, this is fun. This is why we're here. This is why this matters. So it's making it a priority, just as you would other relationships that are important to you, making it fun, and making sure that the time you're spending together is things that you, for the most part, both enjoy, or alternate who enjoys it the most. But things that just keep you both of you feeling alive. We kind of get numb in life, like, oh God, the same routine every day, mundane. So why not use each other as the way to spark that, like, oh, this is fun. Let's try this. Let's go do that.
Yeah.
And many, like here in Munich, many live internationally away from their families. So they don't necessarily have a babysitter or childcare help. And so it's just, putting your phone away, not turning on the television, like going on Amazon, ordering a few games that would be perfect for the two of you to play, and go play board games, or like print out a 20 questions sheet and ask the questions, or who can find the funniest joke, like silly video on YouTube, or joke or meme or something. And like do things like that, where you do that for 10, 15 minutes and then you're just both laughing, and then you can zone out if you need to.
Yeah.
But laughter is rarely an issue at the end of the day when we're exhausted. Sometimes that's what we go to and we want to have. So why not have it together?
Yeah. I love it. I love it. So how do you use your partner as an accountability person for these sorts of things? Like when you're starting to go into this funk, or when they are, how do you effectively give them that little nudge, or ask that they give you that little nudge, and you're not going to get defensive about it?
That is a very, what would be a good word for it? It's like being on a seesaw, standing in the center of it. It is a very hard balance. So I rarely tell couples they need to be each other's accountability partner, like for each other, because if you think about in life, accountability partners were a bit of a hierarchy. Our parents, our teachers, our coaches, our bosses, and now to be like, hey, put your spouse in that role doesn't quite go well. Until we can learn that accountability means an equality of helping each other. And that's like years worth of mindset that has to shift. So what I usually say is that you watch yourself and go, hey, I'm in a negative feedback loop. Like I'm constantly just picking out everything negative about everybody in my space. Something's not right. So I'm probably doing that to my partner. It's checking in. And I also find, if you're familiar with the 5 love languages, if you're doing your love language the way you receive it, but to your partner, like my poor husband, I will say like 20 times in one day, I love you. I love you. I love you. Well, whose words of affirmation? Clearly me. And I got to the point where I finally realized by the 5th time, I'd be like, clearly somebody needs some words of affirmation in this home. And that's his like trigger. But we found humor as a way of accountability. And then he'll be like, yep, got it after the 3rd time you said it. But I was just given a little space before I did something. So it took me realizing when I'm pushing my love, in a sense, on him, that it's because I don't feel like I'm receiving it. And often when I don't feel like I'm receiving it, it's because I'm not giving it to him the way he receives it. Ugh. So it's its own loop. So your accountability needs to be you checking in with yourself. And then maybe you find that friend that you can be seriously honest with and be like, I don't know what is going on. Like, all we're doing is arguing all the time. And she or he needs to be the type that doesn't go down the rabbit hole of like, well, that jerk, da, 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 da.
Sure.
But can really go like, well, are you feeling loved? Are you, what's the areas where you're a little bit worried? What are the things that are getting kicked up for you? And it might be like, yeah, I'm actually worried because he's spending more time at work than at home. Okay, well, that's the conversation to have. Not, you're late again, da, 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 like getting upset over those things. Talk about what really hurts. But having a friend who can get you there is important. And those can be a dime a dozen sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good tip and good bit of advice. I'll tell you, with the love languages thing, you hit the nail on the head for me. I definitely find myself doing that as well. And like, why doesn't he ever ask me how my day is? Well, it's just not how he thinks. Like, it's just not him.
Right. I have a friend who, in her relationship, the husband said, well, you know what mine is. So, when I give it to you, that what I'm doing is showing you love. And she's like, no, that's not how that works. I see it, but I am not receiving it as love, even logically knowing it's the way you want to receive love.
That's not how I feel it. I don't know.
Exactly. That's not how it works. So you can't go, well, my love language is words of affirmation. So when I tell you how wonderful a father you are, you should feel love. And like, words don't matter. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's
not how I process it.
Okay.
Next, Katie and I turn our conversation towards gender role mindset and healthy communication with your family. It got me thinking about gender roles and thinking about like traditional roles and how we think of that in relationships and how that relates to communication. Because quite honestly, in our own family, my husband does a lot of the stuff around the house. He helps out a lot, and he has no issue doing laundry or making a meal, doing the dishes. Like, we kind of share a lot of that. Mm-hmm. I think I have a tendency to be like, whoa, you're not supposed to be doing this, in my mind, even though I know, like, hey, that's great. I'm super glad that he's helping out. But I have a perception that is a little bit skewed, I think. And I don't know, like, how does that come into play? And how do you start to overcome some of those gender role perceptions and things that we've been conditioned with throughout our lives?
Yeah, these are great questions. Kathy, that could be its own.
I know.
But this is something that comes up regularly. Different cultures, different countries, the traditional roles, and whether or not they should still apply and how to change them. Because again, it's like old habits. Whether we realized it or not, we saw things a certain way in our families, and then you bring 2 different people with 2 different viewpoints of what they saw together. And whether or not you had the time to go, I liked that, I didn't like that, this is what I want to bring to my own home, or not, you have to face it. And I think every couple gets to that like peak moment of, is this really the life we want to be living? Is this the way we want to run our home, our family, our traditions? Or is it time to take a step back and say, hey, actually, I don't like that you don't help around the house, or it bothers me that you cook. I really want to be the one to cook. It has nothing to do with what gender we are. So what I typically have couples do is like write down all the things that need to get done in the home and outside of the home. If you've got kids, like birthday party gifts, invitations for them, like things that you don't always think about. Who's going to change the clothes for the season? Who's going to buy the new clothes? You list all of the things, and it's a huge list at the end of the day. And then you say, who does what? And typically you can look at, some of us actually do have particular chores we love. Like it just really makes us relax. So you have your love it, you have your like it, you have your hate it. And the like it's are like we can negotiate those out. The hate it's are usually if you both hate it, then try to outsource it. Try to delegate that to someone else. When your kids get old enough, that's the first chore they get. No, but we just have to be mindful of having the conversation of, instead of, well, because you're home more, which triggers for that person who's home more, well, that doesn't mean I'm less than. But saying these are the projects that need to get done in our home on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. Who's in charge of these? And I do have couples say, how many hours are you in the home versus you? And so it doesn't make sense for it to be split 50-50.
Right.
And this is where I that's okay. You wanted to stay home with the kids. And then it becomes you don't want me to stay home with the kids. Sometimes we as women, like you were saying, we don't realize that we had the mindset. We actually kind of like it to stay in a certain way, but we want to point the finger and be like, no, they're the reason.
Yeah.
Like they're the reason that I'm like this. You're keeping me in the home. You don't want me doing anything. And they're like, no, do what you want. Like, yes, we got to figure out who's going to watch our kids, but do what you want. If we don't have those conversations, if we don't talk about, are we really happy with the quote roles we've put ourselves in, then they will perpetuate, and that festers. And I'll be honest, I think most couples I've seen in the last 2 years have been over that theme of, I'm not actually happy in the role I'm in, and how do we change this?
Huh. So do couples then get caught up on, well, you're not making as much money because, for instance, if someone's working part-time and they aren't making as much money, but they're at home and doing stuff, does the perception ever become that, well, that's not as important because it's not bringing in as much money? But on the other hand, you're at home, but, is there ever that perception that one is greater than the other?
Yes. And I find that it's typically in partners who in their home, money was a big issue. Like, we got to pay off debt. We need to save. We need to, money was just a big thing that they worried or stressed about. That was a big mindset thing. Because I find the couples who had healthy money mindsets in their families, when they come together, it's like, I just respect that you're working. I understand that you're only part-time, but it's still great that you have that. You're doing something that brings us an income that we can use, and it has value as well. But I often see, because most of us have money mindset issues in our families, that you don't even think that my job matters. Well, it does matter, but I do make more. And then we get into the power battle and that struggle. And again, we create a hierarchy without meaning to. Well, because someone earns more, they get more break time when they're home. And then it just becomes this fight. And I had a private practice in the States and then became pregnant with my first and decided to be a stay-at-home mom. And it was about 7-8 months into being a stay-at-home mom that I was like, well, why does he expect me to do everything? We didn't have the conversations. I just really got upset. And we took this long vacation together. Thankfully, he was on a European contract, so that we have long vacations here. Took a long vacation together with our daughter. And I started to really think about, if I put myself in his shoes. So I leave early for work. I don't even get to see my daughter wake up in the morning because I've got to leave so early. And then I go to work and I'm, there doing the job, And then I come home at dinner time because that's when I can get back because of traffic. And then my wife is like, you didn't do this and you didn't do that. And why haven't you done this? And here's the baby you take. I would hate my life.
Yeah. No time for processing. No time for hey family, how are you? Right.
No respite from the day that I just had at work. But then I step back in my shoes, but I've been home all day and I'm exhausted. And I realize neither of us are in an easy place. Neither of us really got a quote break. And I've worked with a lot of corporate people that I do see that their days are not as productive as they could be if they didn't, take that 30-minute coffee break midday, things like that. But if we're honest with ourselves, all of us take breaks in our day in different ways. And and we have to stop pointing the finger at each other and just say, this is like our situation. Sometimes it's just situational, but we want to blame somebody. And that's where the argument lies. It's just easier to point the finger at you than to go, like what can we do about it right now?
Let's talk a little bit about family meetings. And we kind of touched on that almost with just the couples or with just as partners, how to check in with each other. But when you've got your whole family involved, what does a family meeting look like? And how does that open up the lines of communication for families to go with the flow and to have and cultivate an atmosphere of open communication?
Yeah. So when we talked earlier about like couples connecting, I mentioned don't talk business. It's because family meetings are the time to really open the space for that. So usually I say kids can be involved in them starting around 4 or 5 years old because that's when they kind of feel that sense of purpose. I mean, you can do it younger, but they're not fully going to grasp everything.
Sure.
So if you really want your kids to be like really actively a part of it, it's better when they're a little bit older. And you make time once a week, and I usually suggest beginning of the week, Sunday or Monday, that you sit down as a family for 20 to 30 minutes and talk about what is the plan for the week, what needs to get done, who's doing what are the deadlines. So like, hey, on Thursday, we're going to our friend's house for dinner. I'd really like to make sure we have some flowers and a bottle of wine to bring with us. Okay, who's doing that? Which one of us, so it doesn't fall through the cracks? When are we going to buy it? Those types of things, right?
Yeah.
And then even with your kids, hey, I've got this assignment due on next Tuesday, and I need to have a poster board, and I need to have it gets them learning to share their needs and start to think a little more ahead. So you create a space for that, and that's the beginning of the meeting is the where are we going? What are we doing this coming weekend? What plans do we have? Even maybe like vacation plans coming up. What do we need to do? Then the second stage of it is open communication time. How was everybody's week? Is there or the week prior, is there anything that we need to, kind of air grievances? Is there anything we need to talk about that happened that's upsetting you? And this is not the time as parents to scold your kids some more. This is cultivating in the family a safe space to talk about, I'm being bullied at school, or I really didn't appreciate when my sister called me this name and she keeps taking my stuff, or, I've even called family meetings outside of our family meeting time and just saying, family, I don't feel like people are listening to me. I am speaking and no one is responding or reacting because literally no one, all three of them were not. And so it's a good trigger for my husband to go oh yeah, I'm modeling for them. I need to pay attention. And for them to go, ooh, Papa's in trouble too. To see it's not always them. And my husband has had to call them before too and say, guys, look at it. This is not okay. So it is okay for us as parents to say some things, but use it more as a time to kind of coach your kids on how to share the things they're not happy with and talking about how to fix it and change it and make agreements, make compromises. And then the third stage is focusing on something, positive, whether it be what is something you're proud of from last week, what is something you're proud of in our family, what's something you're looking forward to this week, just something that ends it on a positive note, because depending on how that second stage went, which, by the way, make sure you have a talking stick because the second stage can get kind of long, and set a timer. But that third stage is just getting us back on track that things are good, things are positive. And then you typically end with something that's unique to your family, whether it be a chant, a big family hug, singing a song, whatever it is.
Yeah, my kids love dance parties.
Yes.
That would be the way that we would have to end it.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you want to learn more, I'll make sure that that Kathy has a link. I have the Successful Family Meeting Guide that really walks you through and has the worksheets. So you have for your first 3 meetings, here kind of your flow until you create your own flow you're comfortable with. And it teaches you how, as a family, to create a mission statement, because I think that's important too. Why on earth do we have to keep our home clean? Well, part of our mission statement is to be welcoming to all. Okay. Part of that is being able to have a home that people can come to most of the time.
I love it. That makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. And, you know, my husband is not much of a talker. I'm the talker in the relationship. He's a pretty quiet guy. But I can see this tool as being something that would maybe help those who don't talk as much start to get that or start to do that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Does that ever happen? Do you hear of that?
Yeah, I actually suggest rotating who leads it. Who kind of keeps everybody on track, like, okay, now point 2, we're talking about this. And so that, even your older kids get to have a chance to say, and somebody kind of keeps the minutes of the meeting and stuff.
Sure.
And it just gives you that feeling of unity and trust. And then you can look back a month before or later and go like, oh my gosh, we were talking about this. I'm so glad that happened. Or, things like my teenagers never go for it, or preteens. It isn't about whether they'll go for it or not. You just let them know that this is something that as a family, because there's so many different things going on in everyone's lives, it's how we can come together and have some time. And if 30 minutes a week is the way we do that, and it cannot be at dinner time, by the way, because I really find that it's very hard to keep people focused when you're eating, especially, and don't do it right before dinner time, because then people are going to want to rush through. So it can be great on a Sunday afternoon. It can be great Monday after dinner, depending on when bedtimes are. You can find that space. It's there. It's just about like literally our alarm. My husband and I have on Monday nights, our alarm goes off on both our phones 15 minutes before, and we're like, where are you? Where are you? Okay, let's get to, and talk together.
Yeah.
And we have a 3 and a 5-year-old, and we will be transitioning the 5-year-old into being a big part of those family meetings. But for right now, we've almost valued that time as ours, that it's like, oh, our family meetings are perfect, just the 2 of us. It's like, this is more of a couples check-in. But when we start to incorporate both girls, because if you do one, you got to do both. When we start to incorporate them, we're not going to talk about some of the things in our week that don't make sense for her to hear. So you might also find that it's really important as a couple to do the like, hey, here's the other things for this week that we didn't talk about. So making sure you guys have time together too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. Cool. Hey, let's shift gears a little bit as we start to wrap this up. Before we sign off, I want you to talk about this chief household officer thing that you do.
Yes.
Because it's such a brilliant way to look at managing your household, to look at, it's cool. So talk about that a little bit.
So I don't know if you remember, a couple of years ago, there was a blog post that went out where it was like you could put in, it was a calculator. You could put in the amount of hours you spent doing particular household chores. And they did the like salary basically, or the hourly rate of it based off of if you hired someone to do that. And it was this amazing thing where all these stay-at-home moms were like, oh my God, I'd be making $75,000 a year, and they were like seeing the financial value of what they were doing. Well, as I was in my own stay-at-home mom journey and kind of feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't know that, like, I don't feel valued, and I don't feel like what I'm doing has a lot of value, though you're told like it does matter that you do your laundry, and it does matter that you keep the house clean. You don't feel it. And it's because I wasn't looking at it as a job. I started grouping it in with being a mom, and that's where we get it wrong. And that's where the gender like inequality happens. So I remember talking to my husband, and it was when my first was within her first year of life. And I was just like, I have a master's degree. I had a private practice. Like, I'm like, I can't even figure out what we're going to have for dinner. Like all of this stuff. And he's like, you need a title. Like you need to feel important in what you're doing. And so he'd heard it before, but he was the first one to say, you are a chief household officer. And so a couple years later, after my second came around, I realized I was reading books on entrepreneurship just for my own, like getting my brain going. And I was like, oh my God, this is like totally running a house. why are we not like reading these books for this? So I set a mission to start reading books for entrepreneurs and applying it to how we could be more productive at home, more efficient, and allow us to like enjoy being a mom and not have nothing to do with, did we know what we're having for dinner?
It's so brilliant. Because quite honestly, like planning meals it doesn't have to fall all on the mom. You know, like
Right.
it in my opinion, it shouldn't. Like everybody's eating, so why can't we plan that together? Why can't we do that? Like, hey, what do people want to have to eat this week at the family meeting? Why can't
Exactly.
you know?
Yep.
I don't know. That's brilliant, though.
Yeah. So it's
Then you get to enjoy playing, and you get to enjoy like
right.
yeah. And how do you communicate? Then you get to communicate that to your kids. Like, well, now I'm doing household work, or I don't know. How do you communicate that to them, or like, okay, well, now I've got to do laundry and stuff because this is part of my role as
right. I just say like, mom's got to go do her job. You know, my work is as a therapist, and then there's the work. And so I'll be like, my housework. And I usually involve them in it because it's like, you know, especially right now, we're all home. Right. So, hey, I'm going to give you a wet rag to wipe the stairs because we have wooden stairs. Like, you're going to wipe the stairs while I vacuum. Mm-hmm. And so we sort of find ways to incorporate the kids at age appropriate ways that they can start to be a part of helping with these things. But my husband and I have actually made the Excel spreadsheet of who does what and like, you know, what balances out and what makes sense so that it isn't a feeling like it's all on my shoulders. And that was a big part of creating it's called From Stay-at-Home Mom to Chief Household Officer. It was a full program. I've turned it into a course so moms can take it whenever they want and however they want. It was just to give them the empowerment of knowing that there are tools to make this easier, and the mom guilt can start to like subside because it has nothing to do with how good a mom you are, that you forgot the sippy cup for like the third time this week.
Yeah.
Completely about efficiency and, you know, time management and planning ahead and all these things that we would have done in our jobs in like a normal traditional job. But
and putting systems in place. Yeah. Do you recommend that for people who still work outside of the home, or who work outside of the home and do the household stuff, or is it primarily geared towards stay-at-home moms?
So that one I usually say is like if you work 25 hours and under, it's perfect for you because you've got more of the time to create all those structures. I had a whole group of working moms contact me after the stay-at-home mom one came out. So there's a working mom version. So it actually really ended up turning into the Working Mother Initiative, and Boston Consulting Group hired me to do like workshops for their parents on productivity and time management and life balance with their work so that they weren't feeling so overwhelmed because they were noticing the stress on their working parents. So it got picked up by them. And so I've been able to do work with their employees. But it is, that's another available course online too.
How cool. How cool. Okay, last two questions that I ask everybody. The first one is, how does all of this, of what you're doing, cultivate more health, harmony, and happiness in your life?
I am a healer by nature. My desire is to heal people's relationships, to heal their lives so that they can be happier and healthier. So all of this goes towards us just growing as better people. You know, we can step outside of being a mom and a relationship, whatever, just as an individual. It helps us be better so that then we help the next generation to be healthier. So they're not having to go to therapists going like, I had no clue because my parents had no clue, that they start to have a clue.
I love it. I love it. And then the next one is, how are you being more mindful right now?
Great question. So I, before the virus time, bought myself one of those like nice glass tea steeper things where you can put the loose tea in it. It's such an interesting practice, but I'm loving the process of boiling the water, pouring it into that center like cylinder thing with the leaves and stuff in it, and just watching the water change. And as much as like I know moms across the world are like, why isn't it about your kids? No, because sometimes our mindfulness practice needs to be something that is not attached to anything else.
Absolutely.
So I am loving, my husband laughs at me. He's like, I've never seen you so happy and peaceful. And I'm like, it's just amazing. Look, the color, it changes the water. You just
art in the art
so that's
of watching
how I'm being
tea.
more mindful. Yeah.
Okay, well, where can people find you, Katie?
Yeah, so I'm actually undergoing a change in my website, but for right now, you can find me at positive-connections.com. And I'll make sure that Kathy has any updated website that will be coming, so she can change the link. But from there, I'll also make sure you've got the links for these resources I've been talking about, and even some free resources I have if you kind of want to get to know me a little bit better before you just buy a course.
Great, thank you. What about on social media?
So on social media, 2 avenues. If you are that person who wants to be the chief household officer and really embrace that, which again is not gender related, but moms tend to be the ones who are interested, right? We tend to take that interest. It's at the Chief Household Officer Club, both on Facebook and Instagram.
Okay.
And then if you're interested in more the couples thing, it's Positive Connections for Couples.
Okay.
Both on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Very good. Thank you so much for taking time today, Katie, and I wish you a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much.
We definitely covered a lot in that conversation. Pandemic or no pandemic, healthy communication with your spouse or family members is something that can make life a little more enjoyable. Sometimes that requires help, as Katie said. We aren't born knowing how to effectively communicate with others. And we all receive communication differently. But there are some key elements that can be good, healthy habits around creating healthy communication in a marriage or in a relationship. One of my biggest takeaways from our conversation is to remember to have those daily chats with my husband that have nothing to do with the business of our household. Believe it or not, but that's probably going to be one of the hardest or biggest challenges for my husband and me, simply because so much of what our lives revolve around has to do with our kids. But that's a good thing because it will push me to grow outside of my comfort zone and seek out things that I enjoy and maybe have neglected doing or learning about so that I can share them with him. He may look at me and think that I'm bonkers and not want to talk about any of it, but I will keep persisting. I remember this is kind of how it was in the beginning of our relationship too. When I was going through coaching training and learning healthy listening skills and communicating skills then, he was the toughest nut to crack with getting him to actually respond and talk to me about what I was trying to talk to him about, even if I was asking all the open-ended questions in the world. So we'll see how it goes. Stay tuned and I'll let you know. So what was your takeaway? What was the one thing that you want to be intentional about focusing on in creating healthy communication habits in your home? Share in our Cultivating Health, Harmony, and Happiness community, and share any ideas that you may have to make these steps more personal in regards to your own family. Remember that the highlights and the show notes, as well as the links from this episode, can be found at cairnyogawellness.com/podcast36. Cheers to cultivating your own version of health, harmony, and happiness in your life. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you hear, help us grow this podcast by sharing it with even just one other person. And it would mean so much to me if you would take a moment of your time to write a review. Your comments and feedback are what help me continue to bring you topics and guests that can help you and others on their journey in creating health, harmony, and happiness. Remember to head on over to cairnyogawellness.com to get the show notes and links from today's episode. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Cairn Yoga Wellness, and to continue connecting with more resources that could help you enhance health, harmony, and happiness in your own life, subscribe to this podcast. Thanks again for listening.